It's so easy to be average. It takes a little something to be special, doesn't it? It takes a little something special to be a great player. Did you push yourself to be great today?
There wasn't a first down. Not that much. The officiating, I'm bitterly disappointed with the officiating today. That spot, the graphic displays the unfair penalties. The one not called on us on that Perry clearly was being pushed before the ball got there. And the previous penalty they called on Delano Hill, the ball's uncatchable and by the receiver. See, I'm bitterly disappointed. Throw a hat, when you stick, when you're silent, that's a penalty.
This is the Silver Bullets podcast on the Ozone Radio Network, your authority on all things Ohio State. Here are your hosts, Shannon, Sommers, and Chip Minnich.
Not Chip, if you have an iota of human feeling.
Buckeye Nation, you're listening to the Silver Bullets podcast on the Ozone Radio Network. This is episode 7, the Oklahoma Sooners preview, sooner rather than later. I'm your host, Shannon Sommers, contributor at Hayes and Cannon on theozone.net and producer of Acosta Field. Of course, I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Chip Minnich, also a contributor at Hayes and Cannon and Athlon Sports. Chip, how we doing?
Doing well, Shannon.
Today we're going to have Brooke Pryor from the Daily Oklahoman join us. She's going to talk about the Ohio State, the Ohio State-Oklahoma matchup, help us break down Oklahoma, talk about the Sooners and stuff, so you guys get familiar with them before we face them this Saturday, kind of what to expect and what to look for. And do a little game recap, talk about what happened with the Ohio State-Indiana game. We have our game predictions, which I am 2 games behind Chip. It's what happens when certain teams don't convert on their field goal and miss on going for 2 in overtime. We also have our Ask Silver Bullets segment.
After further review.
Looking good. First and goal at the Indiana 2. Ohio State trailing 14-13 here in the third quarter. Empty backfield for J.T. Barrett. Tight end Marcus Baugh motioning right to left. Barrett gets the snap. Barrett running over left guard. Dives and gets into the end zone for the Ohio State touchdown. J.T. Barrett. Marcelino Ball tried to stop him, but Barrett punches it in from 2 yards out, and Ohio State has a 19-14 lead. Barrett going to pass. Back to throw, left side, toss it up. Harris Campbell to his own 35, 40, Campbell, 45, 50. Down the left sideline to Indiana's 30, 20-yard line, Campbell 10, and he takes it to the house for an Ohio State touchdown. Paris Campbell. Buckeyes to their own 41-yard line. Barrett going to fling it. Barrett looking, middle of the field, fires, hits Dixon, racing his way to the 40 of Indiana, to the 30, Dixon left side, 20, 10-5, touchdown, Johnny Dixon of the Buckeyes. 4th and 1. Ball at Indiana's 5. Williams to give. Touch. Straight ahead. Hurdles into the end zone. Antonio Williams. And Williams gets his second touchdown of the night for Ohio State on a 5-yard run.
These highlights are courtesy of IMG Radio Network. All right, Ohio State, first game against the Indiana team up in Bloomington. Started off a little bit slow, a little bit sluggish. Went into halftime, I believe the score was 14-13 in favor of Indiana. Ohio State does what Ohio State does, makes the key adjustments, and the second half they come out and start, putting a thumping on Indiana. The biggest change for Ohio State And I think maybe it's just coincidence. Maybe it lit more of a fire underneath Ohio State, but want to thank the Sooner fans for their overrated chant, because as soon as the overrated chant came out, there was a streak of 0 points by Indiana and I think 39 by Ohio State. Not 39, but like 30 some points by Ohio State. So thank you, Indiana. Know your place. What are your thoughts of the game as far as what happened? Not just, go ahead.
Well, no, I want to give credit to Indiana. They definitely played extremely well. Richard Legow, I thought had, even with the interceptions and the sacks, I thought he played extremely well. Simi Cobbs is going to be a name that you will hear because he certainly played extremely well. Credit to the Ohio State coaching staff, specifically Greg Schiano in the second half started assisting the cornerbacks with some safety help, which kind of led to Simi Cobbs not having nearly the second half as he had in the first. I would say, and this is just, maybe it's just my opinion, I would say that the best thing that happened to Ohio State besides the win is the fact that they faced some real adversity. I'm not saying that the game was ever truly in doubt per se, but the fact that they were able to come out, take what was Indiana's best shot, or at least a very solid shot, and not get rattled. They were able to overcome, make their adjustments, and then, pull away in the second half. And I look at it like a lot of teams after the first week, when they don't play a really strong quality opponent, they can kind of walk away with a false sense of confidence. At least Ohio State, they have a pretty good idea about the things that they need to work on. Urban Meyer is, wanting a better game from the secondary, and the offensive line needs work, and the wide receivers, and we can keep going on and on. There's never a perfect game per se, but for the first game, I thought Ohio State, they played a quality opponent. They faced some adversity. So now they know going into the Oklahoma game, the talent that they have, the talent that needs to be cultivated and developed. We saw the strength of that defensive line, just the ability to continually rotate in fresh defensive linemen. Jayshon Cornell is a name that most Ohio State fans have probably forgotten. He's a former 5-star defensive lineman that has now been relegated to a backup position, but he came in, had that sack and caused a fumble that Jonathan Cooper recovered. There's another quality defensive lineman. The fact that Ohio State has that depth on the defensive line is going to keep them in every game from here on out. So I think Indiana is going to have a good season in the Big Ten. I think this was a great opening game for Ohio State to kind of get some experience for that secondary. I can't say enough positive things about the coaching staff, the adjustments that they made at the halftime to allow Ohio State to get back into it and emerge victorious.
One of my things, were you surprised that Simi Cobb wasn't suspended?
I was surprised, but now that you look back on it, and I feel bad because Indiana lost their other leading wide receiver on special teams, and he's out for the season. They lost him early, which is kind of ironic because that, in essence, is what happened to Simi Cobbs last year. But getting back to your question, I found it surprising, but I also, when I think about the fact that Indiana had placed so much of an emphasis on coming out and winning that game, it's disappointing, but I understand it. Put it that way.
Yeah, I don't know. I have when you're putting winning ahead of the discipline or whatever, I have kind of an issue with it, especially with the way everybody comes down on Ohio State and they want Ohio State to do this or that as far as if somebody has some kind of issue and they want see some kind of discipline. They cried about JT Barrett with a 1-game suspension for the DUI. And I'm not saying Indiana themselves, but I'm just saying the media in general. And then you have Michigan, who has a convicted felon that didn't serve any suspension. Now, fans want to say that his 4-game suspension beforehand and being, he was suspended from the team for the spring and whatnot. Was enough time served? No, it wasn't. I mean, it's a felony. If it was a misdemeanor, I totally agree with you, but a felony is a different class. A felony, you can't get a job working for the government. You can't vote. You can't have a passport and you can't travel. So, I mean, it's obviously a felony is more severe, but I digress on that.
I understand. Another quick thing that I found was puzzling was Indiana was having a tremendous amount of success moving the ball on Ohio State. And then they brought in Peyton Ramsey, who's the backup quarterback, and completely shifted the offense because Peyton Ramsey, I know he's young and inexperienced, and they probably want to get him some game time. But it just seemed like they kind of put themselves into neutral offensively because Ramsey wasn't really much of a passer. They kind of shifted to more of a running attack, which Ohio State had no problem completely shutting down. So I thought that was kind of confusing as well.
I understood that in regard as trying to get a running game going because there was nothing. There absolutely was nothing. And either that's credit to the Ohio State defensive, front seven, and we will know more of this coming weekend, or is Indiana that bad at running the football this year? My biggest issue was the secondary, like a lot of people, and, like Urban Meyer was saying and you alluded to, one of my biggest issues that I didn't really get to watch, go back and watch the game in depth like I wanted to. I started to, but it just didn't work out. One of the key to me, just sitting here, and I don't know the reason why it did or didn't happen. You're getting beat like that, and there's a timing between the quarterback and the wide receiver. And obviously there's a connection between Simi Cobb and Legal. Why don't you, at the line, hit that wide receiver, throw him off a second or so, disrupt that timing, and allow that defensive line to be able to get closer to Legal and either put a hand up or sack him or something?
Well, I definitely saw in the second half that adjustment with I agree with you. I thought they didn't have to wait till the half to make that adjustment, but getting back to the scheme, by putting that safety and kind of, taking away, like in essence, if you want to think about it, double covering Cobbs.
And there was a couple times still in the second half that they went one-on-one with them. Right.
Or at least they would give that, in terms of that look that they were double covering him. Cause you saw Indiana starting to go to, instead of the quick passing, the longer pass routes, which led to the sacks and the fumble and the interceptions and those kind of things. So, credit to Greg Schiano. I mean, I look at, from the positive standpoint, the adversity that they faced. This is something that they'll be able to look back on and say, we've been in, tough situations. They were on the road against a highly motivated opponent with the home crowd, you kind of alluded to it a few moments ago about, chanting overrated, which, I'm going to give Indiana fans a pass there. You are talking about a fan base that historically on the night that they, were praising Lee Corso, years ago, Corso was notorious for bringing his team out to take a picture of the scoreboard when they were actually leading Ohio State at one point, 40 some years ago. But anyway, the fact that I think Indiana, they put a lot, they put all their chips into the center of the table, so to speak. And Ohio State was able to not only take their best shot, but also regroup and move forward. I think this is something to build upon. And I think Indiana, it'll be interesting to see how they do this week against Virginia as well as going forward. But I do think Indiana should have a good season in the Big Ten.
All I know is if you want to troll a fan base, shut them out and have your band put 31-0 on the field at halftime. That's how you troll a fan base, because that fan base can't say anything. Ohio State can't say anything to Clemson for doing it. Might have been classless, might have been whatever, but still. I'm just hoping, I know probably the main thing going back to the secondary that Schiano was probably trying to want these guys to go one-on-one is to be able to use the safeties to come up and help stop the run if need be. And going forward, we're going to, Ohio State's going to need that. But I don't know. I hope that, we're going to be going against they're going to be going against an Oklahoma offense where Baker Mayfield is a very, very good quarterback. He's better than Legal, but does Oklahoma have the wide receivers that Indiana does? And that was the one thing where Kurt Herbstreit even said on the show, or, during the game, I believe, that Ohio State is facing the best pure passer or the pocket passer and wide receiver combination that they're going to face all year. So I think they made the right adjustments. Definitely some things to clean up. The right side of the line, Brandon Bowen, is that his name?
Yes. Brandon Bowen.
He got blown up quite a few times. He was getting better, though, as the game wore on. So I'm hoping to see better things from that right side. They were running a lot in the first half, or, especially in the first possession, towards that right side, which I thought was kind of interesting based on the strength of the left side. So we're going to see how that plays out.
Hello, Buckeye Nation. This is Mike Meals from the Sons of Schmidt podcast and from Hayes and Cannon on the ozone.net. While I was born and raised in Northwest Ohio, approximately 5 years ago, I made the Houston, Texas area my permanent home. As you know, the Texas Gulf Coast has been devastated by Hurricane Harvey. People here still have water in their houses and will have it there for at least another week to 2 weeks. But you can help. With things like donating supplies, the people here will need so much to help rebuild. From things like food and water, to cleaning supplies, to bug spray, to food for their animals, and to supplies for kids going back to school. You can also help by donating money to disaster relief funds like J.J. Watt's efforts through youcaring.org, Sylvester Turner, the mayor of Houston's Hurricane Harvey Relief Fund, or the Red Cross, the United Way, and the Salvation Army. Or you can also donate money to the SPCA or Houston's Pet Alive, which is a foundation that helps take care of animals that were displaced by Hurricane Harvey. We already know that we have the best damn band in the land, and we know Ohio State has the best damn team in the land. But now's our chance to step up and show the world that Ohio State has the best damn fans and the best damn heart in the land. On behalf of all of my neighbors and friends from Beaumont to Houston to Corpus Christi, we thank you. We will recover. We are Texas strong. This is my city.
Joining the Silver Bullets podcast is Brooke Pryor, a beat writer for the Daily Oklahoman, covering the Oklahoma Sooners. All right, this week on the Silver Bullets podcast, we have Brooke Pryor of the Daily Oklahoman to talk to us about the Oklahoma Sooners. Brooke, how are you doing today?
Not too bad. How are you guys doing?
Good, and we're glad to have you on so we can get to know who Ohio State's playing this week.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm not sure that we know who Oklahoma is quite yet, but we're going to work on it.
Yeah, definitely. I know it's top 10 matchup, so it's college game day going to be in Columbus. It's going to be pretty exciting. June 8th this year, Bob Stoops steps down as the head coach for Oklahoma. Oklahoma goes from having one of the longest tenured coaches with Stoops being the man in charge for the last 18 seasons to the youngest head coach at the FBS level. Stoops leaving in June allowed him to collect his bonus and let Lincoln Riley, one of the hot names in college football, take over there with him being, with him taking over, there's always a change in philosophy. Do you think there's much philosophy change between Lincoln Riley and Bob Stoops, or do you think he's just pretty much a cut of Stoops and a disciple of him?
I don't know that disciple is the word I'd go with, but I think he is very much a similar coach to Stoops. There's no there's no reinventing the wheel here that Bob Stoops had been turning for 18 seasons at Oklahoma. Lincoln Riley was coached with him for 2 years. That was enough time. It was kind of a finishing school of sorts after he learned under Mike Leach and then coached with Ruffin McNeil and then came out here. He kind of has had a chance to learn and gain things from some different head coaches that he worked with, kind of got the principles of the air raid from Leach and learned how to kind of be folksy and relatable with Ruffin McNeil. And then he learned how to be a football CEO with Bob Stoops. And all of that to say that he's now, as the head coach of Oklahoma, he's trying to maintain what Bob Stoops built. He's not going to try to buck the system. He has the majority of the same players. He has the entire same coaching staff, other than adding Ruffin McNeil to this staff. So I don't think he wants to make any major changes this year. I mean, Bob Stoops has handed him the keys to a really high level car that is, been running well since he started coaching, and he also brings back guys like Baker Mayfield. So I think he doesn't want to make any drastic changes that will divert away from the game plan that Bob Stoops has been using.
Now, with Oklahoma being in the Big 12, a lot of the talk around the country during the offseason the last couple of years has been how the Big 12 is dying, how they need to add teams in order to survive, and it is what it is, I guess, according to a lot of the national pundits. Plus, when you look at year one, they didn't have a title game, so they weren't able to get into the playoffs. Year two, Oklahoma gets in, but then year three, we see Ohio State get in without a championship game, which confuses everybody in the Big 12. So if I'm the Big 10 commissioner and I say, hey, look, you guys are, I think in 2020 or 21 or something like that, everybody can leave without paying a penalty or something. We want Texas, but we want Oklahoma to come with Texas. Would you join the Big 10, or would you go to, like, say, the SEC if the SEC says, we already have Texas Tech, we don't want Texas? Or would you go to, like, the Pac-12 if it was a joint deal between Texas and Oklahoma to keep that Red River rivalry going?
I think there's been a lot of discussion as far as different conferences that OU could join. I think that the Big 10 does make a lot of sense, especially when you look at fitting an academic profile that OU has kind of placed a top priority on. It also fits as far as the different sports that they have. It's all kind of the same level of competition. Obviously, a different style of football than is typically played in the Big 12. So I think the Big 10 does make a lot of sense, maybe not necessarily geographically, but I think that you do have a lot of people that do want to see OU and SEC just to compete against SEC teams. I don't know that would be OU's top choice. I think they would like to go somewhere with Texas as a package deal. That way they don't have to devote a non-conference game to Texas, because I don't see that rivalry dying out anytime soon. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think it does come down to the SEC and the Big 10. And at this point, the hopes of the Big 12 kind of ride on, and its long-term, like its longevity kind of ride on OU and Texas doing well. Right now, Texas isn't holding up its end of the bargain. So a lot of it's going to depend on how OU does this season and how much interest they can keep in the conference going forward.
Kind of ironic after OU signs that exclusive deal to do the Longhorn Network, and they've pretty much fallen apart. So I'll let Chip go ahead and take over some questions here.
Yeah, I actually had some personnel questions, specifically Mark Andrews, who's plays tight end for Oklahoma. A lot of Ohio State fans may not remember, but Ohio State did recruit Mark Andrews. Obviously, he chose to go to Oklahoma. Can you give our listeners who may not have watched Mark Andrews perform so well against UTEP, can you kind of give them an idea as to the matchup problems that Mark Andrews causes for opposing defenses?
Yeah, he really stretches these defenses, and as he's designated as a tight end, although you really have to think that that's for conference voting for player, to get on first team all conference and first team all American and that kind of thing, because he's not a traditional tight end. He has a tight end body, but they use him primarily as a wide receiver. He's he's a lot bigger than a lot of the wide receivers that you see out there. And so he does he can get into these situations where he can catch the ball over some guys. He's a lot faster than he looks, and he's as strong as he looks. We saw Saturday where he was shaking some guys off. He was showing some footwork that we hadn't seen him use before. I think a big part of that is he was injured for a lot of last season. So after he was one of Baker Mayfield's favorite targets early on, especially against Houston, he ends up getting hurt, has a shoulder injury, and is not able to play very much. So he kind of got a little bit forgotten about until this UTEP game. And this was a giant reminder that, hey, Mark Andrews is a big body target, and he and Baker Mayfield have this chemistry and this connection on the field that really works out well.
So the other, some other personal questions I had is, it looks like Oklahoma's going with a running back by committee approach this season. Do you think that was just because it was UTEP, or do you think that's by design going forward this season?
I think part of that was because it's UTEP. I don't think we're going to see all four used as frequently as the season, as it gets deeper into the conference season. I think that we could still see all four used against Ohio State because it is early on. I don't think it will be as much, and the share and the carries won't be as divided. It looked like to me, Abdul Adams got the start. Riley still isn't calling him the starter, but he, to me, looked like the best option back there. He's able to catch balls out of the backfield. He's really fast. He's got that second gear that he can kick into and really break loose. And then I think the biggest surprise to everyone was Marcelius Sutton. He's a small, shifty back, but he's more than just speed. I mean, he showed some strength breaking through that secondary and that second layer there and almost popped a few loose. He is, so I will say it's a concern with him. He had a fumble. He did recover it, but he has some ball control issues that OU doesn't like. He also, if he isn't right behind the offensive line and if he can't find that hole, he was knocked back a couple times and he's not as strong, I think, as they would like him to be. But it seems like to me, those are OU's top two options going into Ohio State. There's also Rodney Anderson, who scored on Saturday. He's been out for a couple seasons with just some freak injuries, a broken leg, a broken bone in his neck. But he looks physically like a running back and like the type of running back that they like to use. He just didn't show too much. He didn't really grab my attention on Saturday. You could also see Demetrius Flowers, the fullback, getting some carries. He scored a rushing touchdown on Saturday. So if everything goes wrong, if plan A, B, C, and D are not working, I think Demetrius Flowers has a chance to get back there and run the ball a little bit.
So another current Sooner, former Buckeye recruit that I wanted to bring up, Neville Gallimore, who's an interior defensive lineman for Oklahoma. And I always thought that this was kind of an interesting recruiting angle because he's from Canada. So the fact that he not only chose Oklahoma, but to go so far from home. Can you kind of give our listeners an idea as to kind of some of the strengths that he has? Because he looked very impressive against UTEP when I saw him playing this past week.
Yeah, he's a guy who OU really identified early on as someone they wanted to get on the field last year to get work in that 3-4 defense. But now they've switched to the 4-3. It fits him a little bit better. I believe he's lost some weight, a little bit quicker. He's able to really get in there, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's on the Heisman watch list, the award, I'm sure you guys know, given to linemen, not for doing things unlineman-like, recovering fumbles, returning them for touchdowns, things that big guys don't typically do. And I think that embodies him and pretty much it describes him really well, is that he has a quickness that you don't typically see with guys of that size.
So the last question I have before I turn it back to Shannon, and you've kind of alluded to some of this when Shannon was asking about, the switch from Coach Stoops now to Lincoln Riley, and you referenced Ruffin McNeil being on the staff. I realize it's very, very early. You're one game in. But have you seen any kind of distinct changes in Lincoln Riley's demeanor from being the offensive coordinator to now being the head coach in charge of the entire program?
That's one thing about Lincoln Riley is that he doesn't tip his hat to the way he's feeling one way or the other. He could be super stressed out, and we would never know. And Bob Stoops was very much the same way in the time that I spent around him. But he did admit Saturday afternoon that calling the game as the head coach was a little bit more difficult and different than he expected, just with all the things that he had to do as far as he had to decide whether to accept or decline a penalty. That was never something that was on his list of responsibilities. So it's the little things that he's having to get used to. I think that this week, today's actually his birthday. He's 34 years old. I think that it's definitely not like a birthday that he's ever had before, preparing for this game as the head coach, as the one who's making all the decisions. And, this was supposed to be a game, Bob Stoops versus Urban Meyer, and all of a sudden it's Urban Meyer versus Lincoln Riley, two coaches at very different points in their career. And I think that Lincoln's strategy here is to not think about that fact, not think about all of the stakes that are piling up here and the way that this could dictate his coaching career, the way people look back on how he started his OU tenure. So I think for him, he's got to be really narrowly focused here and not let the moment get too big for him.
All right, the Sooners last year, they were terrible on, not terrible, but they were definitely terrible in the secondary. They were terrible on sacks. They go to a four-man front, going from a 3-4. But if you look at their secondary this year, like Phil Steele has them ranked as the 11th best in the country. Defensive line, I think like 35th best in the country, and their linebacker core like 18th. Breaking away from the traditional Big 12 defense, I mean, what do you look to see out of the Sooners defense against Ohio State, trying to hold back that 1-2 punch, the possible running backs, and JT being elusive?
I think that's going to be a challenge. I think OU is more equipped this year especially in the secondary, like you said. I mean, last year they were at this point in the season last year against when OU was playing Ohio State, they were cycling through a guy at cornerback opposite of Jordan Thomas. Jordan Thomas had that spot anchored down, but on the other side of him, they went through, I believe, Dakota Austin, Mekhi Quick, Parrish Cobb, all of these guys to try to find some way to stop JT Barrett and Noah Brown at that point. And they just kept getting torched on those back shoulder throws. But this year, they had that spot more anchored down with Parnell Motley. They are struggling a little bit depth-wise with Jordan Parker, who ended up winning the starting job by the end of the season. He ended up starting 8 games, I think, at that cornerback spot. But they lost him for the season a week ago with an ACL injury. Or I don't think it's an ACL. They haven't said what it is, but it's a knee injury. That's not good, obviously. And that could be a cause for concern if Parnell Motley slips up and isn't playing the way that we saw him play against UTEP. As far as stopping the run, I think the linebacking group is more equipped to do that this year, to back up those defensive linemen. They've got Obonyo Okoronkwo, who has been great, especially getting pressure on the quarterback. But they've also got Caleb Kelly. And then I think that the wild card there in that middle linebacker spot is Kenneth Murray, who's a true freshman who started against UTEP. The way people talk about him is that he doesn't play like a true freshman. He certainly doesn't look like a true freshman, but at some point you have to think that the true freshman tendencies could kick in. And when you get in an environment like the Horseshoe, that could be the time that those bright lights and loud crowd and everything else kind of starts to play in, and he may make some mistakes, and OU's got to be ready to help him overcome those.
Now, switching over to the offensive side, you watched the UTEP game this past weekend. Baker Mayfield went 19 for 20 with 329 yards, and it looked like basically he had all day to pass. He's not going to have that luxury, even though Oklahoma has a very stout offensive line and very experienced, but Ohio State has a very fast defensive line and possibly one of the best in the country. Do you think that he's equipped to be able to handle more of the quick passes like Indiana was throwing against Ohio State? Or do you think they have confidence that they're going to be able to give him enough time back there to get to the wide receivers?
I think that's kind of twofold. I think that he does have the ability to get those quick passes out. He showed so far this year that he is better. He's a better decision maker than he was at this point a year ago. This time a year ago, he was trying really hard. In fact, he was trying too hard, and he was forcing passes that weren't there. He was taking sacks. He was waiting around too long in the pocket, and it was collapsing on him. And I think he's learned a lot from that game. He typically hasn't been a great performer in big games until after Ohio State. That was kind of his last big game meltdown. And since then, he's been performing really well. I think OU's offensive line against Ohio State's defensive line is going to be what determines this game. I think Ohio State has the edge there a little bit with having so many guys that they can rotate. But, OU has Orlando Brown at left tackle. He's being talked about as a first-round pick in some circles. They've got, along with having all the starters that have been starting together since about the midway point a season ago, they've got depth there that they didn't have before. So if a situation arises like Cody Ford breaking his leg on the first series of the game last year, they're more equipped to kind of deal with that, bring more guys in, roll more guys through so there isn't any fatigue happening. But if there is a breakdown there, I think you're going to see Baker Mayfield be quick on his feet, get some quick passes out. He's built a confidence with his receivers that you could see that he didn't have this time a year ago. And so I think that Saturday was a good warm-up for Mayfield, only playing that half, showing that he's still really accurate. And it looks like he's picked up more where he left off last season versus a year ago. He looked like he wanted things too badly and that he was trying too hard, and it ended up backfiring completely.
Last year, the backup quarterback for Oklahoma goes on TV and says Ohio State has a basic defense, and he feels that he's going to be able to get in and he's going to be able to throw a couple of touchdowns against Ohio State. Well, that backfires on them. This year, it seems, if I'm not mistaken, Orlando Brown came out and said that Ohio State's defensive line is, I guess, equal to Kansas, if I read that right. Are these guys just not very smart at keeping themselves off bulletin board material, or they just letting their confidence get out of control?
Well, I don't think Orlando's statement was meant to be bulletin board material by any means. We all kind of looked at each other when he first said it, but when you examine what he said, Kansas doesn't have a bad defensive line. They have the preseason defense. They have the Big 12 preseason defensive player of the year in Dorrance Armstrong on that line. Kansas as a whole may be one of the lower teams in the Big 12, but their defensive line isn't bad. That's the thing, is when he said that, I'm sure he didn't mean it in a negative way. He's not downplaying. He's not trying to diminish how good Ohio State is, because if you look at the rest of the quote, he's talking about, he says, these guys are talented. They're first rounders. They work hard. They're well coached. They're similar to Kansas, and he doesn't mean that in a negative way. At least that's not the way I took it. When I looked at it, I looked at Kansas's line, and in fact, I wrote about it today, and clarifying the fact that Kansas is not, the defensive line is not a bad part of that team.
Well, I'm glad you were able to clear that up, but, Ohio State fans are probably going to have some signs of basic defense and, having a lot of fun like they did last year in Oklahoma.
I was just gonna quickly add, I appreciate the clarification, and I completely understand, Brooke, what you're saying. I would just speculate that Urban Meyer, who is known for seizing on any and every possible opportunity to kind of hype a underdog mentality and disrespect and things of that nature, he's kind of legendary for it. Ohio State fans can attest to this based on when he throttled them when he was the head coach to Florida. Wouldn't surprise me if he completely kind of overlooked the rest of Orlando Brown's statements about any kind of respect for Kansas, and tried to make it out to be something more than it actually is. But I completely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, and he wouldn't be a good head coach if he didn't do that kind of thing. It's just one of those things that you can use it as bulletin board material, or Kansas can use it as a, hey, look, somebody thinks that we're good. People are finally recognizing that we are talented here. So you can definitely take it two ways. And I'm sure that Urban Meyer is doing that. But I'm sure that if it wasn't Orlando saying that they have the same kind of line as KU, somebody else would say something that would be taken wildly out of context, because that's just how these games work, and that's what makes it so much fun. And I'm sure the game is going to be loud at the shoe. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of signs. Wouldn't shock me if we saw Baker Mayfield's mugshot as being held up in there. So it'll just be one more thing that will make it a great atmosphere.
Definitely. College game day is going to be, like I said earlier, in Columbus, so it's, I think, the fourth game in a row for Ohio State having college game day, second one at the Horseshoe, so the atmosphere is going to be kind of crazy. Before we let you go, because I know you got to go do your talk to the players and stuff, what are your not really so much prediction as far as scores, but what do you think the outcome? What are you looking to see happen for the game?
You know, I was just talking to somebody else earlier today about how I think this game's going to go, and I think that Ohio State ends up winning again. I just don't think that OU necessarily has the depth that it needs to beat Ohio State, and it doesn't help that it's in Columbus. When games can be so close like this, any extra factor can help, and that home factor that Ohio State's going to have, I think, really will play into it with the environment, the atmosphere. When you factor in that OU's playing some true freshmen, they're playing some guys like Marcellus Sutton, that running back who's never been in a big environment like that. You know, he's from small town North Carolina, went to junior college, and now he's at Oklahoma, and said that his heart was beating out of his chest just in his home game, in the first home game against UTEP. So he's going to have to find a way to take about 5 chill pills at the Horseshoe. But I think that it's going to come down to the trenches again. I think Ohio State's defensive line has the edge, just with the depth, the guys they can rotate with, the different looks they can show. I saw they started in a 5-man defensive front, something like that. I'm sure Oklahoma is practicing that this week and practicing going up against that, but it's tough to simulate that when you know that you're going to be doing it against, future first-round picks, and a lot of them. So I think that ends up hurting OU. I think the secondary will look much better than it did a year ago, but I don't know how much OU will be able to stop the run with J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber. But I'm looking at a close game. I think OU covers is my prediction. I think the last line I saw was around 9.5. I don't know if it's come up any, but I think it's a close game. I don't think that it necessarily goes right down to the last possession or the last couple. I think Ohio State has it wrapped up in the fourth quarter, and Oklahoma kind of hangs around, but never is really able to close the gap.
Yeah, I think I seen today when I was going through some stuff, I think it might have dropped down to 7.5. I could be wrong. Okay. Well, Brooke, we want to thank you for coming on. Can you give our listeners where they can find your work besides the Daily Oklahoman, like on Twitter and stuff?
Yeah, of course. My Twitter handle is @BE Pryor, Pryor, as in Richard, but we are not related. Unfortunately, because I wish that I had his sense of humor. And then you could, like you said, you can find my work on our website at newsok.com. And then if you happen to be living in Oklahoma and listening to this, it is in the paper every day.
Well, thank you again for coming on. And I was just going to wish you safe travels and a pleasant experience in Ohio Stadium when you make the trip.
Thanks so much. I'm excited. We fly out. Let me think. I got to remember when we fly out so I don't miss my flight, but I believe it's Thursday morning, so I'm excited to get out there.
Fleslet.
One is a riverboat gambler using his gut to make his picks. The other is cool, calculating, and scares Vegas. This is the Silver Bullets game prediction segment. Who are you going to ride with? It is now time for the Silver Bullets prediction segment. Hey, Chip, guess what?
What?
I hate Georgia Tech right now.
Yeah, I kind of figured that you did.
A blocked field goal or not going for 2 in overtime, they put me 2 games behind. I'm very upset about that. They should have beaten Tennessee. Well, just whatever. You are 10-1, I believe, and I am 8-3, I believe. Does that sound right?
That is correct. We both
lost on Texas and Maryland.
Texas and Maryland, but I think the vast majority of people had picked Texas. So
yeah, hats off to Maryland. It's going to be nice to see how they recover after losing a couple of key guys. I think their running back or their quarterback is out for the season, so it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out as the season unfolds. All right, before we get into our predictions, one of the first things I want to mention is Friday night there's a game, Big Ten game. It's Ohio at Purdue. I'm not even going to give you a prediction on this. What I want to suggest to fans, even if you're college football fans, if you're Big Ten fans, don't watch this game. If you don't watch the game, the ratings aren't there. Then Fox Sports, Fox, ESPN, all these, Big Ten network, these guys see that nobody wants to see a Big Ten team playing on a Friday night because everybody's worried more about the high school football games. So please don't watch it. Not because it's Purdue, but because it's a Big Ten team. So that way we don't have to see Ohio State in a Friday night game. Also, we have a lacrosse match of Townsend at Maryland. Wait, no, it's college football. Which, funny, I mentioned Maryland. You know what the line for the Townsend Maryland game is?
No, I don't.
It's even. Maryland goes and beats Texas, and then they're even with Townsend. Figure that one out. All right. Our first game here, we're going to go with the Luke Fickles at the number 8 Khaki Pants at 12 p.m. ABC at Cincinnati at Michigan.
I have a lot of respect for Luke Fickle, but I think they're undermanned. I'm going to go with the Wolverines this one.
Yeah, they're 34.5 point favorites. And the only reason I'm bringing up favorites is because of Joe Dexter. And while you're listening to this, I've said that I don't believe in point favorites and everything. And supposedly Vegas knows everything. So I just want to point out point favorites. But yeah, Luke Fickle just walked in there this year. It'd be a miracle if he pulled off an upset. We know that Michigan is used to having upsets, especially against lesser teams, but I don't see it happening with this one. You got to give Michigan credit for their defense did look faster, but like you said for our power poll when we did our votes, how much of it was Michigan and how much of it was Florida? I mean, Don Brown, he's going to have a great defense and they have players. So just got to figure out what their Achilles heel is here going to be pretty soon. Moving on, we got Florida Atlantic at number 9, Wisconsin. 12 p.m. on BTN.
I'm going Wisconsin here. I know they started out slow last week against Utah State, but I like Wisconsin.
Yeah, I think it was 10-0 going into the second half, and they ripped off 50-some points.
Right.
So they're 31.5 point favorites, so I definitely got to go with the Badgers on this one. Here's an interesting one, especially it's a rivalry game. Iowa at Iowa State. It's 12 p.m. on ESPN. No, Iowa showed some defense in their game that they played this last weekend. Who are you going to go with on this one?
I'm going to go with Iowa State. I think this is a tough one. It always is. But Iowa State's been known to pull the upset, and I know that Matt Campbell is the head coach out at Iowa State, and I think he is slowly but surely making Iowa State better. So I'm going to go with Iowa State here.
Iowa's only a 2.5 point favorite right now. So your prediction isn't like out there or anything like that. But based on seeing Iowa play some defense, even though their offense is like watching paint dry, I think they only scored like 24 points or something like that. I'm going to go with Iowa in this one. Plus, I'm going to try to get a game back, hopefully. Another rivalry game, Pitt at number 4, Penn State. That's a 3:30 on ABC.
I'm going with Penn State. I know Pitt is better than what they showed against Youngstown State, but I just think they have too much. Penn State has too much for Pitt.
Yeah, I know Narduzzi he's a very good defensive coach, and he's going to have something for Saquon Barkley and Trace McSorley. So Penn State's favored by 21 points. I think still Penn State's going to win this one. They have too much firepower, and defensively, I don't think Pitt has anything offensively that they're going to be able to score or, combat and be effective on Penn State. Already mentioned this game earlier, Indiana at Virginia. It's a 3:30 game on ABC.
I'm going with Indiana for all of the all that we discussed in relation to Ohio State. They did impress me with their offensive attack, especially their pace. If they come out with the same kind of pace that they did against Ohio State, I think that's going to be too much for Virginia to keep up with. So I'm going to go with the Hoosiers here.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention that too. How much of that pace was hurting Indiana too? I mean, I'm sure you've been practicing that and everything like that for the last couple of weeks or however long in training camp. Your body still isn't used to it. So it's going to take some while in order to go at a crazy pace the way that they were going. I mean, but yeah, I'm going to go with Indiana on this too. The biggest key to me is Indiana going to have a running game? If they do, if they're able to run against Virginia, then it's going to be a very long night for the Cavaliers. All right, number 23, TCU at Arkansas. Yes, I said Arkansas. It's a 3:30 p.m. game on CBS.
This is a tough one, just because I have to confess I didn't see either team play. I'm usually a fan of Gary Patterson and TCU, but I think our old friend Bert probably, the fact I'm gonna go with that home field. It's not with any strong sense of conviction, but I'll go with Arkansas here.
TCU probably has a good offense. Like I said, I didn't check it out or anything either. The biggest thing we know that TCU doesn't have a defense. So I think that's an advantage for Arkansas. So I'm going to go with the Razorbacks also. All right. Now we're going to talk about the night games, which has 4 matchups of top 25 teams, which is pretty impressive for the second week of the college football season. Number 13, Auburn at number 3, Clemson, which I'm still trying to figure out how Clemson jumps from 5th to 3rd. Like, I think they jumped over Penn State or whatever they did just by winning against Kent 56-3. But if Ohio State plays Kent or Akron or somebody and wins 56-3, they drop in the polls. Whatever. Who are you going to go with this one?
I'm going with Clemson, and it's based on, for all of the hype that Ohio State's defensive line has received, Clemson's defensive line is legit as well. And so that's going to be the basis of it. I think that Clemson's defensive line, everyone keeps talking about Auburn with Jarrett Stidham at quarterback. And I just think that Clemson's defensive line is going to be the difference here, and the fact that it's at home. So I'm going with Clemson here.
Well, from what I see, Clemson's a 5.5 point favorite. I know Auburn and Clemson, I think that's a pretty good rivalry, but I'm going to go with Clemson myself. And speaking of my rant, I don't know if you ever look at your emails like we get from the FWAA, and they now have to post who votes where. And you see somebody like our friend Kevin McGuire, who votes Clemson number 2, Penn State number 3, Michigan number 4, and Ohio State number 5. I don't understand how beating MAC teams is more impressive than beating a divisional opponent. But Kevin knows football, so definitely he knows football. Our matchup that we really are concerned about, number 5, Oklahoma, coming to the Horseshoe. Number 2, Ohio State. It's a 7:30 kickoff on ABC.
I don't want to give too much away because I do have an upcoming opponent watch article that will be on Hayes and Cannon this week. But
foreshadowing.
I think, yeah, exactly. I do believe that Oklahoma is going to try to attack Ohio State in a similar fashion that Indiana did. I just simply believe Ohio State has too much, and I think the home crowd is going to be a big factor. And I'm going to go with Ohio State to pull away in the second half, similarly as in the fashion that they did against Indiana. I'm going to go Ohio State 42, Oklahoma 21.
Wow. If anybody has ever listened to our shows, Chip giving Ohio State 42 against Oklahoma is a big deal. Just my 2 cents on that. I'm definitely going to go with Ohio State. You look at the defensive line. Yes, Oklahoma has a very good offensive line, but like Brooke said, the biggest key for Ohio State is Ohio State's going to be able to keep them fresh, a lot of rotation. So I think that pressure is going to be relentless. They shut down the running attack of Oklahoma. It's going to be a very, very long night for Baker Mayfield. And Ohio State has traditionally kind of, brought the wood out and had a lot of fun against Heisman Trophy candidates. So I'm going to go with Ohio State, and I'm going to go 34-17. All right, number 15, Georgia, at number 24, Notre Dame. It's a 7:30 kickoff on NBC, and I think the only reason Notre Dame is put in here is just in order to make NBC happy, in order to be able to try to get some ratings, while ABC and Fox have some very good games on it. Who are you going to go with on this one?
I'm not feeling well about either team. I believe Jacob Eason is out, which means, the fact that, going to Notre Dame, Notre Dame played Temple, which now, Matt Rule is no longer there. And I know Temple lost a lot of talent, but I'm going to go with Notre Dame just simply because of the inexperience that Georgia has at quarterback in the home field for Notre Dame.
Isn't this, I think I read somewhere, and I want to say it's since 1986 or something, first time that Georgia has come up to the north to play a football game. I don't know if you've seen that or not.
Well, I don't know about, I can't speak for Georgia. I know that this was the first time for Florida last week against Michigan that, since 1991 or when Florida went up to Syracuse, but I wasn't aware.
Yeah, but they only
Georgia,
went to Texas.
You might be right. I know. I'm just saying the fact that they merely left the state, period.
Yeah, but they still didn't.
Earth shattering.
They still didn't come see us. They still didn't come see us Northerners. They want to give us their hurricane aftermaths, like they're probably going to do after this one comes through. But they don't want to come face us in football.
Yeah. Well, anyway, yeah, I'm not entirely familiar with the last time Georgia ventured north.
Yeah. All right. So you're taking Notre Dame. I don't know. I think that we look and see the SEC a lot of times is ranked, and by the end of the season, you see a lot of these teams aren't even in there, and it's just this bias that we in the Big Ten feel that everybody has for the SEC and everything. I think this could be a case here, but at the same time, I am not sold on Notre Dame. I'm not sold on Brian Kelly as a head coach. So I'm going to go with Georgia on this one, even though Notre Dame is favored by 4.5. All right, number 4, Stanford at number 6, USC. It's an 8:30 game on Fox.
Another tough one to call. I'm going to go with Stanford simply because USC did not look as impressive as you would have thought. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Western Michigan. I know they went 13-0, or excuse me, 12-0 last year before they lost the Cotton Bowl last year. And so there must be some residual talent, even without PJ Fleck as the head coach there anymore. But I just would have thought, for all of the hype surrounding Sam Darnold as the projected number 1 overall pick in the 2018 NFL draft at quarterback, he didn't have that great of a game. I just think that Stanford, year in, year out, that they come ready to play, and they're not flashy. They're not really doing anything, unexpected. They line up, run the ball well, play consistently fundamental defense, sound defense. I'm just going to go with Stanford just based on those historical facts, but it's the fact that both teams are highly ranked. This should be a close game.
Yeah, I think USC is going to figure out some of their issues that they had. I don't think Sam is a Heisman candidate, but if he gets on track for this game, he might really open up some eyes. I'm going to go with USC for basically the simple fact of either I'm going to go down 5 games or I'm going to be up 1 game by the time this is all over and done with. It's going to be between that range. Now it is time for the Ask Silver Bullets segment. This is your time to be a part of the show. It is time for the Ask the Silver Bullets segment. Remember, if you want to ask us a question, feel free to use the hashtag AskSilverBullets on Twitter, or you can follow us and DM us on SILVR Bullets Pod. You can like us on Facebook and leave a post or send us a message. You can email us at silverbulletspodcast@gmail.com. You can also call and leave a voicemail that we will play on our show at area code 567-203-5705. With all that, today's question comes from our friend Ray's Fan Geo on Twitter. Does J.K. Dobbins' performance make him the number 1 running back, or will he have to split carries? I'll answer this one real quick before I turn it over to you. Until Mike Weber is healthy, yes. Go ahead.
I think you're right. I personally, I do think J.K. Dobbins is the starter. I know that there's a lot of speculation about the fact that they're listed on as or, and I have no doubt that Mike Weber is going to play. Personally, I would start J.K. Dobbins. I would be prepared for Mike Weber to play. What I thought was quite in a positive revelation, the emergence of Antonio Williams against Indiana.
Yeah, he looked pretty good.
The fact that you had a guy who has been the subject of a lot of transfer rumors, and Tony Alford was never shy in giving Antonio Williams a lot of grief, either through the media or some of the practice clips that we've seen. But yeah, absolutely. I would go with J.K. Dobbins. I would be more inclined with Antonio Williams if Mike Weber's not 100% healthy. Sounds like he is, but it is very reassuring to see Antonio Williams emerge the way he did against Indiana.
If Weber is 100% healthy and he has no issues with that hamstring, he will be the starter. But if there's any question mark in the coaching staff's mind during this week of practice, if there's any question in the coaching staff's mind then it's going to be J.K. Dobbins. Agreed?
I would go with that, but I consider me the person who looks at J.K. Dobbins, even in just one game. I think the versatility that he has skill wise as a receiver in terms of lateral agility. I believe that he fits the offense, his skill set better than Mike Weber. That's not to imply that Mike Weber's not a good player. I'm saying that I think Mike Weber as a receiver, in terms of just overall quickness and speed, I think Dobbins is superior. But there's certainly a place for Mike Weber in this offense, and I'm certainly hoping that he comes back 100% healthy.
Do you know that Dobbins, his numbers, because I think Saquon Barkley won Big Ten Offensive Player of the Week. And I think that Dobbins, he was a Freshman Player of the Week, but his numbers, he ran for more than Barkley, but I think he might have been one reception and like 11 yards short for passing. So, I mean, you think about a true freshman who didn't play a single year for high school last year because he was out with the knee injury. He comes to Ohio State, goes to Bloomington in a division game, and sets a record for Ohio State for freshmen in their first game, taking it away from Maurice Clarett. That's the hype that we were hearing during training camp. Definitely fit this kid, and wow. Yeah,
I can't believe Tony Gerdeman wrote that article telling everyone to calm down on the hype. What's the matter with Tony?
Well, he was on Tony's hype train. So
I do know. Tony knows I'm being, because I'm just returning the
sarcasm. Not like Tony's going to listen to this anyways.
Yeah,
we're not sons of Schmidt.
Or answer somebody's legitimate question. Thank you.
All right, Buckeye fans, that's going to do it for this episode of the Silver Bullets podcast on the Ozone Radio Network. Chip, why don't you go ahead and give them your information?
Yeah, I can be found on Twitter at Chip Minnich, Minnich. Like Shannon, I'm a contributor to Hayes and Cannon on the ozone.net, as well as at Athlon Sports. So thank you for following me on Twitter. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I'm going to turn it back to Shannon.
We want to thank Brooke Pryor, the Daily Oklahoman. You can follow her on Twitter at BE Pryor, and catch her work at newsok.com. Thank her for stopping by and talking about the Oklahoma Sooners and giving us a preview and help break down what we're hoping to see. You can follow me on Twitter at ShannonCFB. You could follow the show on Twitter at SILVR Bullets POD. Like us on Facebook, Silver Bullets Podcast. You can subscribe and listen to our shows on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play. Also, you could listen to our show on theozone.net, along with our other shows that we have in our network, like Oh Hail No with Joe Dexter and Claire Crawford. You have Sons of Schmidt, which thankfully they're back with Mike Meals and Brandon Zimmerman. I'm glad to see that Mike and his equipment survived the horrific floods that were down there, since he lives out in Katy, Texas. You can also listen to Across the Field with Tony Gerdeman, which I produce. Don't forget, send your questions. Thanks for listening, and go Bucks.
Go Bucks.